I'm Nivedita Mukherjee, and you're watching Budget with BS, a power packed show with a rich mix of news and views around the Union Budget 2023. I'm here for the seventh episode of the very special show with Ruchika Chitravanshi.
Hello, budget is less than a week away, but we still have lots for you from the people who know and who matter.
We have covered many core economic issues, including agriculture, manufacturing, taxation, and disinvestment. Our viewers must be curious about the big story today. Ruchika, what's the lineup?
Well, let's greenlight all things green in this budget. You guessed right, the spotlight today is on Green Budget, brought to you by Shreya Jay, who's passionate about areas like renewable energy, EV, environment, you name it.
India is part of a select list of nations which have given themselves a net zero target year, however, not legally binding as the developed ones. With more than ever impetus on green energy, green fuels, and energy efficiency, the Union Budget 2023 is expected to give sops for the green energy economy and decarbonization. The Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman did make energy transition a key focus area of her infrastructure development plan in the last budget. But the intention was merely in terms of policy announcements with an acute lack of budgetary grants. Sovereign green bonds were the green highlight of the last budget. The centre is looking to test the waters for green bonds with small issuances. The Reserve Bank of India has announced first issuance of Rs 8,000 crore to happen in January and another of a similar amount in February. Renewable energy deployment has been one of the brightest spots of the green energy sector, wherein the sector brushed off the pandemic woes. Policy fluctuations such as basic custom duties on solar imports and mandatory domestic procurement caused a slowdown in capacity addition. But renewable energy continued to garner the bulk of clean investments in the country. Sector majors, including a state-owned NTPC, have pitched for putting mandatory domestic procurement on hold for at least 4 to 6 quarters till a substantial domestic capacity comes up. But while capacity addition has grown, the share of green energy in the grid has yet to show similar growth. To improve the dissemination and absorption of more green energy, the centre recently proposed a 2 trillion rupees scheme for transmission projects connecting 500 gigawatt renewable energy projects. A budgetary announcement giving sops to the transmission sector, states and industries that buy renewable energy could be part of the budget.
So you are right. This has been a buffer year compared to what we had a couple of years back because of COVID uncertainty. So this year, I think things have again starting to take good shape for most renewable players. Uh, Sentimentally, now we hopefully think COVID is behind us. The green momentum continues, and now it is for all of us to capitalize on some of the opportunities which are either there or coming in the future. Specifically, if I talk about this year, many of the projects which were kind of stuck in constructions, either because of a policy issue, a court-related matter, or more importantly, through COVID, I think those projects have started seeing traction. But I think, as you mentioned, one of the major challenges we are all facing and we continue to face is what happens post implementation of BCD, which was a step jump in cost for us. So I think there are some positive signals out there. There are contractual clauses which do protect us in some way, and government has kind of shown the willingness to engage with us to ensure that projects are put in the same economic condition as they were prior to the implementation of the BCD, as we call it. So there has been some positive movement. There are still some issues to be ironed out, and as industry, we genuinely hope that we don't see any major policy upheavals going forward. As we all know, policy certainty is one of the most important criteria for investors to continue to be interested in India.
Another upcoming segment which has started attracting significant private capital is green fuels. Recently, the Union Cabinet announced 19,744 crore rupees for the National Hydrogen Mission. Out of this, close to 17,000 crore rupees is a financial incentive for green hydrogen and electrolyzer manufacturing. The incentive would be given through a production-linked incentive or PLI scheme. SOPs for setting up green hydrogen hubs are expected to be announced in the budget. Battery storage is another area where the sector's expectations are riding high after the centre announced PLI for the same. The sector is hoping for a reduction in the GST rate on batteries and their components. It also expects a reduction in interest rates for electric vehicle financing and an extension of the flagship FAME2 scheme. Power Ministry officials said a budgetary grant proposal to provide viability gap funding for grid-scale battery storage has been submitted to the Finance Ministry. The most anticipated announcement in the budget concerns climate financing. Having given itself an ambitious target of net zero, coupled with short and long-term mitigation plans, India is looking at the world to finance its energy transition. With no singular agency managing global or domestic climate funding, it is high time India announces one. Recently, PFC and REC proposed to be a development financial institute for climate funding, but the proposal is yet to get the final nod.
What I expect this budget will do is to lead the way to bring in international finance into the country in a most easy manner with the least amount of regulatory red tape. So actually, there is no need to provide any special incentives for decarbonization. The economic incentive today to move and transition to renewable fuels and to renewable energy is so high that all that needs to be done is grid accessibility and very strong access to whoever can get renewable power. The infrastructure has to be created to make it available on a steady, uninterrupted basis. There is no need for any incentive. The economic incentive is strong enough.
The 5 core segments which could form the basis of the green announcements in the Union Budget are industrial decarbonization, green fuels and energy storage, climate financing, energy efficiency, and just transition for fossil fuel industries, ranging from coal and mineral mining to thermal power plants. What remains to be seen is how many of these sectors get intent and how many some real money.
Looks like this budget will be greener than ever before, in sync with governments around the world. India has to step up its green energy initiatives, and the budget has to reflect that. So this time, it has to go much beyond mere policy announcements, and like Shreya says, budget must show where real money is. What do you think, Ruchika?
Yes, the world is watching with great interest as India has declared its net zero target. Well, moving on to a subject that has kept us on a different zone in the last 3 years, Shohini Das, who tracks health and has covered COVID-19 closely since the outbreak, spoke to Professor K Srinath Reddy, the president of the Public Health Foundation of India, on budget and health.
Good morning, Dr. Reddy.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Business Standard Budget Show. Thank you for taking out time. Do you think it has been able to make an on-ground impact for the target population? And what kind of changes could be brought into these schemes and how the budget would also probably push the envelope in the right direction?
Primary healthcare still doesn't have the resources that it needs. And particularly, we have seen urban health mission has not really taken off in a big way. And we also saw that during the pandemic, that it is the big cities where actually the microbes enter, they spread, and then they spread to the rural areas. And if you have a weak urban primary healthcare system, you're unable to identify cases, test them promptly, you're unable to contain through appropriate isolation and quarantine mechanisms. So all of that becomes the weak link. So you need rural primary healthcare most certainly to be better resourced in terms of both financial resources and human resources, but urban primary healthcare also to emerge from the shadows and start becoming much more visible and effective. And while we are talking about primary healthcare, we are really trying to promote the idea of health at home or close to home. So the health and wellness centers become very important. So the full complement of staff that is required in terms of ASHAs, auxiliary nurse midwives, the mid-level healthcare providers, all of them are going to be required. Now, one of the things that we must really attend to is the fact that it's not just the original mission of NRHM with maternal and child health services, a few infectious diseases, and to some extent nutritional problems that form the agenda of NRHM, reflecting the agenda of the Millennium Development Goals. Now, with the Sustainable Development Goals and our own health policy very clearly saying we need comprehensive primary health care, non-communicable diseases like diabetes, heart diseases, cancers, chronic respiratory diseases are becoming so frequent and are a major cause for concern and a drain on income of the rural population as well. So you need to actually make your healthcare very comprehensive, including mental health problems, all of that. So the current number of ASHAs and ANMs are inadequate. We need to double their number. And that brings efficiency into the system. But at the same time, you can actually see that as a job creation opportunity as well. We require increased people at all levels of workforce. We need basic doctors, advanced skill specialists. We need basic nurses. We have specialist nurses. We need mid-level health workers. We need ANMs and ASHAs. But while many of them will take years for completing their training, like you can't produce a specialist in 6 months, you can actually train ASHAs and ANMs in a much shorter span of time. And therefore, strengthening primary healthcare should be a high priority for the government, and the investment should actually go into the National Health Mission for that particular purpose.
In the last 2 years, we saw that much of our energies and the government machinery went into managing the pandemic, in surveillance, in buying and distributing vaccines. Now that we are probably seeing the pandemic receding, should we plan ahead for the future pandemics that may also hit us? And does the budget also need to have some provisions for research and development in vaccines of the future or drugs? What is your opinion on that? Or is it too early?
You do require a lot more R&D and investment. But I would make an additional point there. It's not just the private sector. We do need to increase our public sector capacity, because the private sector may not always find it attractive to produce certain types of drugs whose demand may not be on a very large scale, or which may not give them a large profit margin. At the same time, if you want at some point in this very competitive world to issue compulsory licenses to produce some drugs, to make use of the provisions of the Doha Declaration, then the private sector may not be ready to step up to the plate, because A, they may find that this is not their priority, or B, they may be worried about multinationals chasing them to court, all kinds of problems. So we also need to build up public sector capacity by the side, while certainly assisting the private sector also to enhance their capacity. I think we should see all of them as important national assets and promote that, but the public sector cannot be cast aside. That is an important element that we must recognize.
Also, in the previous budget, sir, we have seen that there was focus on viability gap funding in trying to get the private healthcare sector to expand to tier 3 and 4 cities. What do you think? I mean, has that translated into more beds on the ground? And is viability gap funding the right approach to address this problem?
I'm not very sure that it succeeded. We saw that during the pandemic period. Leave aside regular care. When they had to identify institutions which could deliver vaccines in the second tier and third tier cities, towns, they could not really find the requisite public, private sector capability to deliver those vaccines. Metros, fine. But beyond the metros, what happened? So I think to depend upon the private sector alone to take up the responsibility in district level and sub-district level is going to be unrealistic expectation. We do need to strengthen our district hospitals and sub-district hospitals in the public sector. Where the private sector has the appetite to get in and then enter, let them do it and they can be supported in some way. But handing it over the public health, public infrastructure entirely to private sector, I don't think is going to be very successful. But you need to connect all of them. We need all the players on the ground to play their part. We need the public sector, we need the private sector, we need the not-for-profit voluntary sector. There are a number of charitable hospitals or not-for-profit hospitals. We must all get them in that. Similarly, even in primary care, particularly in the smaller towns, you find a number of individual private practitioners, small nursing homes. How do you bring them into the overall ambit of universal health coverage? How do you incentivize them? Unless we build a team with some degree of accountability, we are not going to succeed. You cannot depend only on public sector facilities in a mixed health system, which is evolved by default and not by design. So you have to bring whatever resources you have into play with efficiency and equity.
What should be our post-pandemic policy focus areas? If we are to list three main areas the budget should definitely address, because we saw a lot of children missing out on regular vaccines. Certain public health emergencies have emerged as a result. So top three according to you.
There is a list of what are called essential public health services. And they include surveillance, etc., but they also include things like immunization. So all of them should be supported without interruption, even when challenged with a public health emergency. And we ought to be able to build those buffers very clearly. So that's going to be an absolute priority. If you look at what's happening in terms of even the G20 agenda, the three priorities that have been identified are pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, which is fine, which sort of fits in. But it's not just the pandemic. Covering all infectious diseases is going to be an important element in that, including TB, of course. So the second element is the whole idea of getting universal health coverage advance further. And there, I think recently there has been some media report that the Ayushman Bharat beneficiaries under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, PMJ, will be increased from 40% by an additional 12% or some 12.5% or something like that. So progressively, and also bringing the central government health service into the Ayushman Bharat. The idea of progressively unifying all our insurance programs, health insurance programs, into a single payer system is going to be an important element. And how do you build the architecture of that? But universal health coverage can only be delivered if you make it really affordable. So providing greater financial protection and especially providing coverage for outpatient services and drugs, which is not a part of PMJ at the moment. So unless you link up primary health care and Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, the comprehensive primary health care and Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana should be linked up in such a manner that outpatient care and free medicines are also available, not just providing service at the time of hospitalization. And that requires a certain degree of not only administrative governance changes, but also more investment into the process.
Thank you so much, sir. It's always a pleasure talking to you. So many takeaways from this conversation. And thanks once again for taking out time.
Professor Reddy, who's been seen and heard on multiple forums as an authoritative voice through the pandemic, makes some very important points in the interview. He's rightly said that the attention on health should not fade away and that there should be investment in equitable health system. Also, he's clear that public health infrastructure cannot be left to the private sector. Ruchika, do you think budget will address some of these?
I think the budget focus is likely on the social sectors, Professor Reddy's wish list in that sense should not go to waste.
And now it's time for that unique segment that everyone waits for. Over to you, Ruchika.
The budget nuggets segment today is, like always, quite offbeat. If you're confused about what really is a pre-election budget and what constitutes an interim budget, this one is for you. Conventionally, the budget presented right before the general elections is an interim budget rather than a full one. Understandably, governments would like to announce freebies closer to elections, and the budget is a great platform. It is generally accepted that no big announcements are to be made since there is no guarantee that the same government will come back to power in the next few months. Another factor is that an elected government can present only 5 full budgets. So Nirmala Sitharaman would be expected to present an interim budget in 2024, having presented 5 full budgets by then. However, in recent years, this convention was abandoned when in 2019, an election year, Piyush Goyal of the ruling BJP announced the Prime Minister Kisan Samman Nidhi scheme. Goyal also announced a full tax rebate for those whose annual income was up to 500,000 rupees. This budget was pre-election, yes, but was it interim? No. To give an example of what the practice was, in 2009, another election year, Pranab Mukherjee played true to the statute book and presented an interim budget. The year before that, however, the Congress government had announced the big farm loan waiver. Now we must remember that the February 2008 budget came amid a global financial crisis. Strictly speaking, we cannot call it a pre-election budget as it was 1 year before the election. In 2014, the budget presented a few months before the general elections came in the backdrop of the taper tantrum of 2013. P. Chidambaram, the FM, gave mild tax relief, announcing a couple of tax cuts. It was still not a full budget. Here's what Jaswant Singh did in January 2004, a month before the budget and a few months before the general elections. He announced a tax bonanza, providing relief worth 10,000 crore rupees. So he did not break the convention of presenting an interim budget before the election, but did manage to present a mini budget right before. Coming back to our question, what is a pre-election budget? Well, the jury is still out on that one.
That was some research on which finance minister presented what kind of budget. I'm sure our viewers have enough food for thought from this episode. That's all we have for you today. See you next on Monday.
Thank you for watching, and do remember to tune in on Monday at 6 p.m. for the next episode.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.